Years after I stopped babysitting for that family, police searched a neighbor's house and found hundreds of pages of journals. According to investigators, several entries mentioned babysitters who regularly watched the children across the street. One of those babysitters was me. My name is Emily, and this happened when I was 16 years old, back in the summer of 2012. I'm 28 now, but there are still moments from that summer that I remember with uncomfortable clarity. Most teenage memories fade over time. You remember the big things, like graduations or first jobs, but the smaller details usually disappear. For some reason, the details from this particular experience never did. At the time, I lived in a suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. It was the kind of neighborhood where parents let their kids ride bikes until sunset, and nobody thought twice about leaving a garage door open for half the day. People waved at each other from their driveways, neighbors borrowed tools from one another, and crime was something that happened somewhere else. Most of my friends had part-time jobs. My best friend Sarah worked at a frozen yogurt shop, and my friend Megan spent her weekends stocking shelves at a grocery store. I went a different route and became a babysitter. For a 16-year-old, it felt like the perfect job. Most evenings involved helping kids with homework, watching cartoons for an hour, and then sitting on a couch while they slept. Compared to standing behind a cash register all night, it was easy money. The family I babysat for most often was the Parkers. Mike and Jennifer Parker lived near the end of a quiet cul-de-sac about 5 minutes from my house. They had 2 children, Ethan and Lily. Ethan was 10, quiet and mature for his age, while Lily was 7 and seemed physically incapable of running out of questions. Over time, I became close with the family. I was at their house so often that it almost started feeling like a second home. I knew where they kept the snacks, which floorboards creaked, and exactly how long Lily would argue about bedtime before finally giving up. That's why the first strange thing didn't seem important at the time. One afternoon, I was sitting on the front porch while Ethan and Lily rode their bikes up and down the driveway. Across the street, I noticed one of the neighbors standing beside his mailbox. At first, I barely paid attention to him. He looked completely ordinary. If you passed him in a grocery store, you probably wouldn't remember his face 5 minutes later. The only thing that caught my attention was how long he stood there. He wasn't checking his mail, talking on the phone, or doing yard work. Every time I happened to glance in his direction, he was standing in exactly the same spot, looking toward the Parker house. I remember checking the time on my phone at one point because it felt strange. Nearly 15 minutes had passed, and he hadn't moved much at all. Eventually, Ethan and Lily went back inside for a snack. A minute later, the man turned around and walked back to his house. The whole thing felt odd, but not odd enough to mention to anyone. When you're 16, you spend a lot of time convincing yourself that you're overreacting. A few weeks later, I was babysitting again on a Friday night. Around 9 o'clock, I was helping Lily brush her teeth before bed when she asked me a question that immediately got my attention. "Emily, why does that man always look through our window?" I laughed at first because I thought she was trying to scare me. When I looked at her, though, she wasn't smiling. She looked completely serious. I asked her what she meant. "The man across the street," she said. "Sometimes he looks through the side window when Mommy and Daddy leave." The words hit me harder than I expected. I tried to keep my voice calm and asked when she'd seen him. Lily shrugged. "I don't know. A lot." Kids say strange things all the time, so part of me wanted to dismiss it immediately. Another part of me couldn't stop thinking about the man standing by his mailbox weeks earlier. After both kids went to bed, I checked every window in the house. Nothing looked unusual. The yard was empty. The street was quiet. The motion lights hadn't turned on. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Still, I found myself looking out the windows every few minutes for the rest of the night. I didn't see anyone. Months passed without another incident. School started again, and life got busy. Between classes, sports, and preparing for college applications, babysitting became just another part of my routine. The strange conversation with Lily slowly faded into the background. Then something happened that brought all of it rushing back. It was a Saturday afternoon in early fall. The weather was nice, so Ethan and Lily were playing in the backyard while I sat on the patio. The Parker property was surrounded by a tall wooden fence that blocked most of the neighboring yards. It felt private back there, safe. I was scrolling through my phone when I heard a faint sound behind me. It was soft enough that I almost ignored it. Then I heard it again. I turned toward the fence. For a brief moment, I saw what looked like someone's fingers gripping the top edge. The second I focused on it, they disappeared. I stood up immediately. At first, I thought maybe one of the neighbors was trying to get a better view of something happening nearby. But when I walked over to the fence and looked around, there was nobody there. No voices, no footsteps, nothing. The entire thing lasted maybe 3 seconds. That should have been reassuring. Instead, it bothered me for the rest of the day. I couldn't stop thinking about how quickly the person had moved after realizing they had been seen. From that point on, I became noticeably more cautious whenever I babysat. I kept the doors locked. I checked windows before putting the kids to bed. Whenever Ethan and Lily played outside, I stayed close enough to bring them inside if something felt wrong. At the time, I honestly thought I was being paranoid. Years later, I learned I wasn't. The truth came out after I had already left for college. One evening, my mom called me and asked if I remembered the man who lived across the street from the Parker family. The second she mentioned him, I knew exactly who she meant. There was something in her voice that made my stomach tighten before she even explained what had happened. The man had been arrested. At first, I assumed it was something minor, maybe a domestic dispute or some kind of financial crime. Instead, the investigation uncovered something much darker. According to police, officers found journals, online writings, and detailed records documenting his obsession with a girl in the neighborhood. The material filled hundreds of pages. Investigators believed he had spent years monitoring routines, schedules, and opportunities to approach her. The more they uncovered, the worse it became. Then my mom told me something that I still think about today. Several of those writings mentioned babysitters, including me. I remember sitting in my college apartment completely frozen as she explained what investigators had found. Apparently, the man had been watching the Parker house for years. Not casually, not occasionally, deliberately. The journals reportedly contained observations about who came and went from the house, what times people arrived, and how often the children were outside. Even stranger, there were notes specifically describing babysitters as obstacles, people who disrupted opportunities he believed he might eventually have. One entry reportedly described a babysitter who checked windows too often and paid too much attention whenever the children were outside. The police believed he was referring to me. That realization made me feel sick. The things I thought were insignificant at the time had apparently been noticed by someone I didn't even realize was watching me. Suddenly, every strange moment made sense. The staring, the comments from Lily, the figure near the fence. None of it had been random. For years, I wondered whether I had imagined parts of those experiences or exaggerated them in my memory. Finding out the truth was almost worse because it confirmed that my instincts had been right all along. The part that still bothers me isn't that he knew who I was. It's how close he came to blending in completely. He looked like every other neighbor on the street. He lived in plain sight, waved at people, and went about his daily routine without drawing attention to himself. If he hadn't been arrested, nobody knows how long it would have continued, and that's what makes this experience so disturbing to me. When people imagine dangerous individuals, they usually picture someone who looks suspicious or behaves in obvious ways. The reality is often much different. Sometimes they're just the quiet neighbor standing across the street, watching everyone else while nobody thinks twice about watching them. I've been babysitting since I was 16. By the time I was 19, I had a small list of regular families. People who trusted me, people I knew. The Hartleys were not one of those families. They found me through a mutual friend, a woman named Carrie who I'd watched kids for twice before. She vouched for me and that was enough for them. My name is Megan. I'm from a mid-sized town in central Ohio, the kind of place where nothing really happens, where everyone sort of knows everyone, and where you never think twice about opening the door when someone knocks. The Hartleys had 2 kids. Emma was 7, quiet, bookish, the kind of kid who'd rather sit in the corner with a chapter book than watch TV. Noah was 4, loud in the way only 4-year-olds can be, constantly running, constantly asking why. Their parents, David and Renee were heading to a work dinner about 40 minutes away. They said they'd be back by 10. It was a Friday night in October. The house was nice, big actually, older construction, 2 stories, a finished basement, the kind of layout where you can't quite hear everything from every room. They walked me through it when I arrived, showed me where the kids' rooms were, where the snacks were, left the parents' number on the fridge even though I already had it in my phone. Nothing strange. The one thing Renee said before they left, and I almost didn't catch it because she said it so casually halfway out the door, was, "Oh, Emma mentioned something about a man who waves at her sometimes from the street. If she brings it up, just, tell her not to worry about it." She smiled like it was nothing, like it was just a kid thing. I nodded and they left. I thought about that for maybe 30 seconds. Then Noah knocked a full cup of apple juice onto the carpet and I forgot about it entirely. The first 2 hours were fine, completely normal. We ate dinner, mac and cheese, the box kind. Noah insisted. And I got them both into their pajamas by 7:30. Emma read in her room. Noah fell asleep faster than I expected. By 8:15, the house was quiet. I was on the couch watching something on my phone when Emma came downstairs. She wasn't supposed to. I'd told her lights out at 8. But she didn't look scared or upset. She just stood at the bottom of the stairs with her book under her arm and said very matter-of-factly, "Daddy said someone might stop by tonight." I looked up. "What do you mean?" "He said it this morning, that a friend might come by." I told her I hadn't heard anything about that, and that she needed to go back to bed. She shrugged and went upstairs. I sat there for a second thinking about it. David hadn't mentioned anyone stopping by. Neither had Renee. I figured it was just a kid misremembering something. 20 minutes later, someone knocked on the front door. I wasn't expecting it, so it made me jump. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. It was a man I didn't recognize. He looked to be in his mid-40s, medium build, wearing a dark jacket. He was smiling, not a big smile, just a relaxed, casual one. The kind of smile that's meant to look like it belongs there. I didn't open the door, I spoke through it. "Can I help you?" "Hey, sorry to bother you," he said. His voice was calm, friendly. "I'm a friend of David's. My name's Marcus. He asked me to stop by and grab something from the garage. Shouldn't take more than a minute." Something about it didn't sit right. Not because he seemed threatening. He didn't, not at all. It was something else. Something I couldn't name yet. "I'm sorry," I said, "but David didn't mention anything to me about that. I can't let anyone in without checking with the parents first." He nodded. "Of course, totally understand. No worries at all." He gave a little wave, turned around and walked back toward the street. I watched through the peephole until he was out of view. Then I called David. It rang 3 times before he picked up, clearly in the middle of a noisy restaurant. I apologized for interrupting and asked him if he had a friend named Marcus stopping by. There was a pause, a short one. "Marcus?" he said. "No, nobody should be coming by. Why?" I told him what happened. He said he'd call me right back. I went to the front window, the one that looks out onto the street, and moved the curtain just slightly to look outside. The man's car was still there, parked about 4 houses down, engine off, just sitting. David called back 2 minutes later. He didn't know anyone named Marcus. He said they were going to leave the dinner early, that they'd be home as soon as they could, maybe 45 minutes. He told me to lock every door and not open it for anyone. His voice was controlled, but I could hear something underneath it. Something tight. I checked the back door. Locked. Side door off the kitchen. Locked. I went upstairs and checked on Noah, still asleep, and knocked on Emma's door. She was awake, sitting up in bed with her book. I told her I needed her to stay in her room for a while, that everything was fine. We were just going to play a quiet game. She looked at me the way 7-year-olds do when they know you're not telling them the whole truth. But she nodded and pulled her blanket up. I came back downstairs, checked the front window again. The car was gone. I stood there for a second, trying to decide if that was a good thing or not. I hadn't decided yet when I heard the knock again. This time it came from the back door. I didn't move. I just stood in the kitchen doorway and stared at the door. He knocked again, 3 slow knocks, and then he spoke, loud enough that I could hear him clearly through the door. "I know you're alone in there." His voice was different now. The friendliness was gone. "I just need you to open the door. I'm not going to hurt anyone. I just need a minute inside." I didn't say anything. I was already moving, quietly, up the stairs, into Emma's room. I closed the door behind me and locked it. Emma looked up from her book and I put my finger to my lips. She understood immediately. She slid out of bed without making a sound and sat beside me on the floor. I called 911. The operator was calm, efficient. I kept my voice as low as I could while she took down the address. She told me units were on the way. She stayed on the line. And then Noah started crying from across the hall. Not a scared cry. He'd woken up confused the way little kids do, calling for his mom. But it was loud, and I knew the man outside could hear it. I knew he now knew exactly where we were in the house. I crossed the hall in 4 steps, got Noah, brought him back into Emma's room. He was confused and a little fussy, but I held him close and he quieted down faster than I expected. Emma put her arm around him without me asking. She was 7 years old and she just did it. We sat on the floor together in the dark, backs against the bed, door locked, listening. For a long time, it felt like forever, but it was probably 8 minutes. There was nothing. No sounds from outside. No footsteps. No knocking. Just the 3 of us breathing in the dark. Then the sirens. They got louder fast, and then the lights were moving across the bedroom ceiling through the gap in the curtains. I heard car doors, voices outside, official voices. By the time David and Renee pulled into the driveway 20 minutes later, the police had already swept the property. The man was gone. No sign of forced entry. They found footprints in the soft dirt next to the back fence, fresh ones. But that was all. I gave a statement. I described him as best I could. The police said they'd follow up. I drove home that night with my hands shaking on the wheel, telling myself it was over, that we'd gotten lucky, that the outcome was fine, and for a while I believed that. About 6 weeks later, I got a text from Renee. She said the police had identified the man. His name wasn't Marcus, his name was Gerald Foss. He'd lived in that house, the Hartley's house, 11 years ago before 2 other families had owned it in between. He'd been watching the family for months. He knew their routines, he knew the layout of the house, he knew where the garage key was kept. He also knew Emma's name. Renee included one more detail in that text that I've never been able to shake. She said that when the police searched Gerald's apartment, they found a photograph. It was taken from the street, a long lens, from a distance. It was a picture of the front of the house, taken at night. The timestamp on the photograph was from 3 weeks before I ever babysat there. He'd been watching before I even knew that family existed. I haven't babysat since.